Hey guys, welcome back to Pages of Glow. Today we're going to be reading a short story called The Red Guards by Jiang. Now, this short story is actually from a memoir that Jiang wrote, and in it she explains her struggles during the Cultural Revolution. Now, in case you don't know what the Cultural Revolution was, in 1966, the Communist chairman Mao Zedong began his attempt to transform China's government, and he enlisted the help of teenage students known as the Red Guards. And these Red Guards would go to house from house seeking to get rid of all four olds, which were basically anything that represented old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. These searches went on for several years and destroyed millions of lives. And the Red Guards specifically didn't really like rich families or families who had money. And Jiang's family definitely did have wealth. And so in The Red Guard, the author tells us about a time where the Red Guards stormed into her apartment and basically tried to take everything that would have seemed really wealthy or anything that was for olds. And she talks about how she had this stamp book that she really liked, and they took that away because stamp collecting is considered a wealthy hobby. Now, I don't want to get into the entire story and say exactly what the plot is, so I'm going to tell you a couple facts about the author. Now, rather than giving you short facts, I'm going to tell you just a quick overview of exactly what happened. So, Jiang's happy childhood in Shanghai, China became one of fear when Mao Zedong took over China. And like I said before, because of her family's wealth, she and her family were treated very harshly by supporters of the Chinese government for years. So when Jiang moved to the United States in 1984, she decided to write Red Scarf Girl to share her childhood memories of the Cultural Revolution. She said that by telling her story, she hoped that people would learn about the Cultural Revolution and make sure that such a terrible event would never happen again. Without further ado, let's get on with the story. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like to hear next. The Red Guards by Jiang. Mom got home from work that evening, looking nervous. She whispered to Dad and Grandma, and as soon as we finished dinner, she told us to go outside and play. "We have something to take care of," she said. I knew this had something to do with the Cultural Revolution. I wish she would just say so. We were too old to be fooled like little children. But I didn't say anything and went outside with the others. When it was nearly dark, Ji-yoon and I went back home, leaving Ji-young with their friends. As we entered the apartment, I smelled smoke, acrid and choking. I looked around in alarm, but Grandma was sitting alone in the main room, showing no sign of worry. "Grandma, is there a fire?" we shouted anxiously. "Don't you smell smoke?" "Hush, hush," Grandma pulled us to her quickly. "It's nothing. They're just burning some pictures." We looked puzzled. "Your mother heard today that photos of people in old-fashioned long gowns and Mandarin jackets are considered for olds. So your parents are burning them in the bathroom." "Can we go watch?" I loved looking at pictures, especially pictures of all those uncles and aunts I'd never met. Grandma shook her head. I winked at Ji-yoon, and we both threw ourselves in her arms, begging and pleading. As always, she gave in and went to the bathroom door to ask Mom and Dad. Mom opened the door a crack and let us in. The bathroom was filled with thick smoke that burned our eyes and made us cough. Dad passed us a glass of water. "We can't open the window any wider," he said. "The neighbors might notice the smoke and report us." Mom and Dad were sitting on small wooden stools. On the floor was a tin wash bowl full of ashes, and a few pictures disappearing into the flames. At Dad's side was a stack of old photo albums, their black covers stained and faded with age. Dad was looking through the albums, page by page, tearing out any pictures that might be for Lords. Then he put them into a pile next to Mom, who put them into the fire. I picked up one of the pictures. It was Dad sitting on a camel when he was about 6 or 7 years old. He was wearing a wool hat and pants with suspenders, and he was laughing. Grandma, looking very young and beautiful, was wearing a fur coat and standing beside him. "Mom, this one doesn't have any long gowns or anything," Jiang said. "Can't we keep it?" The Red Guards might say that only a rich child could ride a camel. And besides, Grandma's wearing a fur coat. She threw it into the fire. Mom was right, I thought. A picture like that was for Lords. The flames licked around the edges of the picture. The corners curled up and then turned brown. The brown spread quickly toward the center, swallowing Grandma, then the camel, and finally Dad's woolen hat. Picture after picture was thrown into the fire. Each in turn curled, melted, and disappeared. The ashes in the wash bowl grew deeper. Finally, there were no more pictures left. Mom poured the ashes into the toilet and flushed them away. That night, I dreamed the house was on fire. Early in the morning, Song Popple rushed upstairs to tell us the news. All of the neighbors were saying that a knife had been found in the communal garbage bin. The neighborhood dictatorship had declared this to be an illegal weapon, so the entire bin was searched, and some incompletely burned pictures were found. In one of them, they recognized my fourth aunt. Because my fourth uncle had fled to Hong Kong right before the liberation, her family was on the neighborhood party's community's list of black families. This weapon was automatically associated with the pictures, and that was enough for the Six Fingers to report to the powerful neighborhood community. All day we were terrified. Grandma and the three of us went to the park immediately after breakfast. This time, none of us wanted to play. We just sat together on Grandma's bench. "Will the Red Guards come?" Jiyoon asked. "Maybe they will, sweetie," Grandma answered. "We just don't know." She took out her knitting. I tried to do the same, but I kept finding myself staring into space with no idea where I was in the pattern. Jiyoon and Jiang ran off to play, but always came back to the bench after a few minutes. At 4 o'clock, Grandma sent me to see if anything was happening at home. I cautiously walked into the alley, alert for anything unusual, but there was no sound of drums or gongs or noise at all. The mop was still on the balcony. I looked into our lane, but there were no trucks. Everything seemed calm, and I told Grandma it was safe to go home. Mom and Dad both came home earlier than usual. Dinner was short and nearly silent. Soon after dinner, we turned the lights off and got into bed, hoping the day would finally end peacefully. I lay for a long while without sleeping, but finally drifted into a restless doze. When I heard pounding on the door downstairs, I wasn't sure whether it was a dream or it was real. It was real. I heard my cousin Yu Mei ask, bravely, "Who's there?" Six Fingers' voice replied, "The Red Guards. They're here to search your house. Open up." They rushed into the fourth aunt's apartment downstairs. At first we could not hear much. Then we heard more. Doors slamming, a cry from Hua Hua, crash after crash of dishes breaking overhead, and the distinct voice of the Red Guards. By this time we were all awake, but no one turned on light or said anything. We all lay and held our breaths and listened, trying to determine what was going on downstairs. No one even dared to turn over. My whole body was tense. Every sound from my fourth aunt's room made me stiffen with dread. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. In spite of the fear, I began to feel sleepy again. I was jolted awake by shouts and thunderous knocks. Someone was shouting Dad's name. Jia Zing Ring! Get up, Jia Zing Ring! Dad went to the door. What do you want? Open up, Six Fingers shouted. This is a search in passing. The Red Guards are going to search your home in passing. We often ask somebody to buy something in passing or get information in passing, but I had never heard of searching a house in passing. Dad opened the door. The first one in was Six Fingers, wearing an undershirt and dirty blue shorts and flip-flops. Behind him were about a dozen teenage Red Guards. Though the weather was still quite warm, they all wore tightly belted army uniforms. Their leader was a zealous, loud-voiced girl with short hair and large eyes. What's your relationship with the Jiangs living downstairs? The girl yelled, her hand aggressively on her hip. He is her brother-in-law, Six Fingers answered before Dad could open his mouth. Oh, so you're a close relative, she said, as if she only realized that now. Lean in, C, for confusion, severity for resistance. Hand over your weapons, now or we will be forced to search the house. She stood up straight and stared at Dad. What weapons? Dad asked calmly. We have no. Search! She cut Dad off with a shouted order and shoved him aside. At the wave of her arm, the Red Guards behind her stormed in. Without speaking to each other, they split into 3 groups and charged towards our drawers, cabinets, and chests. The floor was instantly strewn with those contents. They demanded that Mom and Dad open anything that was locked, while we children sat on our beds, staring in paralyzed fascination. To my surprise, it was not as frightening as I had imagined through the weeks of waiting. Only Little White was panicked by the crowd and the noise. She scurried among the open chests until she was kicked down by a Red Guard. Then she ran up into the attic and did not come down. I watched one boy going through the wardrobe. He took each piece of clothing off its hanger and threw it onto the floor behind him. He went carefully through a drawer and unrolled the neatly paired socks, tossing them over his shoulder one by one. I turned my head and saw another boy opening my desk drawer. He swept his hand through it and jumbled everything together before removing the drawer and turning it upside down on the floor. Before he could examine the contents, another one called him away to help him move a chest. All my treasures were scattered on the floor. The butterfly fell out of its glass box. One wing was crushed under a bottle of glass beads. My collection of candy wrappers had fallen out of their notebook and were crumpled under my stamp album. My stamp album! It had been a birthday gift from Grandma when I started school, and it was my dearest treasure. For 6 years I had been getting canceled stamps from my friends, carefully soaking them to get every bit of envelope paper off. I had collected them one by one until I had complete sets. I had even bought some inexpensive sets with my own allowance. I loved my collection, even though I knew I should not. With the start of the Cultural Revolution, all the stamp shops were closed down because stamp collecting was considered bourgeois. Now I just knew something terrible was going to happen to it. I looked at the Red Guards. They were still busy moving the chest. I slipped off the bed and tiptoed across the room. If I could hide it before they saw me, I stooped down and reached for the book. Hey you, what are you doing? A voice demanded. I spun around in alarm. It was a Red Guard leader. I didn't do anything, I said guiltily, my eyes straying toward the stamp album. A stamp album. She picked it up. Is this yours? I nodded fearfully. You got a lot of lords for a kid, she sneered, and she flipped through it. Foreign stamps too, she remarked. You little xenophile. I'm not. I blushed as I fumbled for words. The girl looked at Jiang and Ji-yun, who were still sitting on the bed, watching, and she turned to another Red Guard. Get the kids into the bathroom so they don't get in the way of the revolution. She threw the stamp album casually into a bag of things to be confiscated and went back downstairs. She didn't even look at me. Inside the bathroom, we could still hear the banging of furniture and the shouting of Red Guards. Ji-yun lay with her head in my lap, quietly sobbing, and Ji-yong sat in silence. After a long time, the noise died down. Dad opened the bathroom door and we fearfully came out. The apartment was a mess. The middle of the floor was strewn with the contents of overturned chests and drawers. Half of the clothes had been taken away. The rest were scattered along the floor with some old copper coins. The chests themselves had been thrown on top of each other when the Red Guards decided to check the walls for holes where weapons could have been hid. I looked for my things. The wing of the butterfly had been completely knocked off the body. The bottle holding the glass beads had been smashed, and the beads were rolling all over the floor. The trampled candy wrappers looked like trash, and the stamp album was gone forever. The end.